All right, let's get started. So, in a sneak peek, what are we covering today? First of all, I'm going to walk you through the fundamentals around how AI agents pick what companies to recommend and what content to cite for the answers. And I'm going to walk through the differences between traditional SEO and AI search. Then I'm going to walk you through the search demand research process. Basically, how to find the prompts and the keywords that your customers are searching for across your buyer journey. And I'm going to give you some frameworks and mental models for how to reverse engineer what wins citations and recommendations. And then, after the foundations are established, I'm going to walk you through the full end-to-end system of how you can create a roadmap to win SEO and AI search, or answer engine optimization, AEO. Then I'm going to do my best to cover the topics that Inês was going to cover, which is, first of all, how to de-anonymize the traffic that you're getting on your website, basically identifying what are the companies and the people that are actually going to each of the different pages of your website, and then how to use retargeting campaigns. And I'm going to walk you through the different types of retargeting campaigns that you can do to make sure that after you find out what are the companies and people that are actively going to your website, so basically people that already know you and are actively in the buyer journey process, and then you can retarget them on different mediums. So the end-to-end process, not only to get AI search visibility and traffic, but also to turn that into high intent pipeline. An important point, let's try to make this as interactive as possible. So make sure to drop any questions on the chat for me to do further deep dives on each of the different topics. If I can, I'm going to walk through them live. If not, my team at the end will basically pick out of the different comments that are left throughout the webinar, and we're going to do our best to cover as many of the questions as possible. All right, so who's running this webinar? So naturally, Inês is not joining us today, so I will skip her introduction. On my side, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Reach. We're building the operating system that several different companies use to win visibility in AI search and to drive pipeline from that. So we are currently running SEO and AI search programs for tens of different companies. Here are some of them, like ColdIQ, a leading go-to-market agency, Carro, company that raised $100 million, Series B, if I'm not mistaken, in the US, and several other leading companies like Indie Campers, company that is close to getting to 200 million, according to what they say online. So we're doing this for a number of different companies. So naturally, everything that I'm sharing live today is not theoretical. It's based on our experience and naturally empirical observation of the data that we've analyzed of what actually drives revenue. And why is this such a hot topic? Because I'm sure you've seen LinkedIn is flooded with people talking about recommendations for how to win AI search. And this is not out of nowhere, right? This is a quote that I really like from the VP Enterprise at OpenAI, where they describe that very soon, mostly AI agents will actually choose companies, products, and services to recommend. And they will do it based on highly targeted quality content. So what this means is that if you're not present in AI search, and if both people that are doing research to buy software, product, or services, and also even AI agents, when they start deciding on their own which tools they need to use to accomplish the jobs that and the goals that they're targeted to do, you will become invisible. So AI search is becoming massively important in the buyer journey. And naturally, this is why many go-to-market leaders, this is a survey that Cal Poyar from Growth Unhinged and Maya Voye from Go-to-Market Strategies did to several 100 to 200 go-to-market leaders as some of the fastest growing tech companies in the US. And as you can see, all of them list AI search or answer engine optimization, AEO, as the number one go-to-market bet for 2026 and beyond. And the interesting thing is that a lot of people are not sure, is this just hype? Is this already real? Is the traffic from Google declining? And the interesting thing is that the traffic from Google is not declining or from traditional search engines. However, people are searching more and more in AI because AI is making it possible for new use cases to be discovered and to be searched for. And ChatGPT currently owns 19.5% of the total share of search traffic. And this was a study done in Q4 of 2026. And as you can see, it has been increasing. And the interesting thing is that even if you're already doing good in Google or traditional SEO, that behavior is changing. And 68% of the searches in Google now do not lead to a click, mostly because people are either already happy with the answer from the AI overviews or they end up going, for example, to Google AI mode or each of the other features. And the interesting thing is, many people claim that, oh, we're already doing search ads, for example. And the reality is that if you're doing that, you're only capturing 6% of the existing search demand of basically potential customers that are actively going to your competitors, either in AI overviews or naturally in traditional search. This was a super interesting statistic found where traffic from bots have now already surpassed traffic from humans. So it clearly showed the direction that this is taken, and that's why the SEO and the AI search optimization or answer engine optimization services market is projected to grow tremendously because many of the best go-to-market leaders are already seeing that this is a huge opportunity. It's a space that is moving extremely fast, and that's why they are turning to agencies or professional services companies to help them keep up with everything that is changing and make sure that they win because there's an arbitrage opportunity to be captured. And naturally, we are not just talking about this out of research that we found online. As I mentioned, we already have plenty of proven case studies, and I can follow up to everyone with the exact tactics that the Rich team used to drive, for example, 506K in annual recurring revenue to ColdIQ attributed to SEO and AI search in 4 months. Indie Campers, for example, grew revenue attributed to AI search by 13x. And this is a company that has more than 9 figures in revenue. And Carro is now seeing most of the leads, especially the largest leads, so 7+ figure deals attributed to AI search. So this is not just hype. And if you don't start acting right now, you're going to be left behind. Okay, so let's move to the fun part. How do answer engines actually work? This is an oversimplification, but it's meant to walk you through the basics of it. So you can think of it like this. When someone types a specific prompt, like for example, what's the best laptop for a college student? What happens under the hood? This is the prompt that the user did, a human did, for example, on ChatGPT. Under the hood, ChatGPT performs a bunch of different searches. So what is typically called the query fanouts, because from one prompt, ChatGPT performs a number of different searches to obtain the information that is up to date to answer the prompt of the user. Of course, this only happens when it's prompts that require live information, up-to-date information. There are prompts that just obtain the information that the model was already trained with. So naturally for those prompts, or for example, if you ask a prompt about history, it typically doesn't need to perform a live search. If you ask a prompt about what is the best laptop, that might change every day. So the models need to perform live searches. They obtain a number of different pages for each of these different searches, each of these different keywords. And then the major thing that differs between SEO and AI search is that the LLMs are very good at analyzing large corpus of data. So what this means is that unlike a human that typically only clicks the first result of the search engine results page or the second or the third, because naturally there's a limit of the cognitive load that humans can read, they don't read all of the different answers. LLMs are able to analyze vast amount of data, digest what are the best pieces of information that the models need to answer the original prompt, and then they answer based on that. So in order to do AEO, you basically need to first of all do SEO for each of the different keywords, but then there's another layer of optimization that you need to do, which is basically figuring out of all of these pages that are being analyzed, which ones are getting the citation and influencing the recommendation. So it's almost as if you had to do two different steps of optimization. And here I'm going to show you a real example. This is the Reach platform, which I'm also going to show a link for everyone to be able to sign up for the waitlist, because up until now, only the Reach team is using the Reach platform. We're basically using that plus the AI agents that we've built internally for our customers. But soon we're going to open up the platform that we've used to help companies like Carro become the #3 most cited domain in their category. And as you can see, the LLMs are probabilistic. And what this means is that for this specific prompt, what is the best inventory management software for Adobe Commerce? The models perform a set of different searches. The interesting thing is that even if they're probabilistic, they end up choosing some searches more than the others. As you can see, this search was used 60 times out of the last 240 responses out of all of the different models. So naturally, when you're doing this optimization, what you need to understand is what are the searches that are being used the most often, and basically you need to then analyze what are the sources, what do the companies that are being recommended have in common, and then you need to try to analyze the patterns. I'm going to show you a live example in a second. So how do you actually win AI search? So first of all, and this is going to be also an interesting point because I'm going to show you some of the Cloud Code setup that we use to make sure that each of the different jobs to be done that we have to do for each of our customers, we're able to do it in a much more detailed and data-driven way with Cloud Code, using the data from our platform and actually a lot of internal tools, scripts, and agents that our team built. So the first part actually starts with product positioning. So, and this is often an overlooked thing, because in reality, if you don't have a clear positioning for each of the different use cases, personas, or segments, you don't know what are the keywords and prompts that you should even be optimizing for. And when you create content, you don't know how to position your brand for that specific segment. Because it's important to keep in mind, with LLMs, it's not just about getting the link or the ranking on the blue links in Google. It's much more important to have the narrative fully laid out, because you don't want AI to just cite you. You want AI to recommend you with the right positioning. Naturally, if not even your company clearly knows how to position for each of the different segments, it's going to be very unlikely that, first of all, whoever is doing SEO and AEO will know how to position your company for each of the different prompts and keywords. And second of all, for the LLMs to know how to position your company when recommending you in each of the different sets of prompts. And now is the time that I'm going to walk you through some of the setup in Cloud Code, because naturally, if you're not using Cloud Code, if you're not using AI, not to produce AI slop, but to actually do the things that would be extremely hard for you to do as a human. Basically, doing keyword and prompt research at scale, creating content with much higher quality by using AI to augment what a human can do, and many other jobs to be done. For example, analyzing the data that you have from Google Search Console, Google Analytics, keywords and Google keywords and prompt research data, so that you can do A/B tests, so on and so forth. So let me walk you through the setup. So here I've got a lot of things. There's too much context to show you, so I'm just going to walk you through the fundamentals. I'm not going to walk you through the basics. If you're interested, just drop in the comments, and I can then do a full session just dedicated to how to use Cloud Code, not only for SEO and AEO, but also perhaps for all things marketing and sales related. So first of all, it's very important, and I'm going to walk you through our own, or even like the one that I created for Snov. the first thing that you need to do is to create a set of artifacts for each of the different sections of positioning of your company. So, for example, you need to clearly define the positioning of the company. You need to have an artifact dedicated to the custom results. You need to have an artifact dedicated to how you compete with each of the different competitors, so on and so forth. Ideally, and here is one that we're currently using, for example, at Reach, you should even have, for example, specific sets of webinars that you've run, your content on the website that you want to always take into consideration every time that you're talking about specific topics. So, for example, if you're creating a piece of content on a specific topic, you should have here your specific point of view on that topic. And that naturally allows you to make sure that whatever it is that you're doing, Claude knows that it pulls from this context, whether it is to create content, but also, and more importantly, for all of the different analyses, whether it is to analyze data that you have, whether it is to analyze whether a keyword or a prompt makes sense for you to target, so on and so forth. And the next step is to identify the set of keywords and prompts. This is one of the most common overlooked step of an AEO strategy, because the first thing that you need to do after, of course, you've laid out the product positioning in the knowledge base, is to decide and do research on what are your customers actually searching for in the different AI models, and naturally the different search engines as well, because all of the strategy will be derived from understanding how AI models are recommending companies for each of these different prompts, and what you need to do changes depending on the prompt that you're currently targeting or the keyword that you're targeting. So there's not going to be a one size fits all approach. There's not going to be a checklist of how to do SEO. Most of that, pardon my French, it's bullshit. You need to do that analysis for each of the different prompts. You need to analyze what are the pages that the models are citing, and what do those pages have in common, and what are the gaps. And it's based on that that you can create an action plan. You can create a roadmap. And even then, you're going to come up with hypotheses. Because, for example, you're going to see that 60% of the pages have a specific module. For example, a table with a comparison of all of the different competitors mentioning specific features or specific use cases. But you're not sure if that is actually going to be the thing that gets you cited and recommended. So what you need to do is you need to experiment, and then you need to measure the results so that you can A/B test different tactics. And if it's not working, you can retroactively update. And I'm going to walk you through how to do each of these in detail. The first step regarding the positioning, this is very important. Since LLMs analyze a lot of different data sources, it's very important that you have consistent information and positioning in all of the different places. Not only your website, but also on the third-party websites that are mentioning your brand. So basically owned content, your website, and earned content. Third-party directories, review platforms like G2, Capterra, so on and so forth, and also, in many cases, communities like Reddit, Quora, sometimes Facebook groups. And this is a framework that I really like to use. There's a lot of schools of thought for how to define the positioning, but this is a mental model that I like to use to describe the value propositions of the companies, where basically you identify a specific persona that is trying to do a specific use case or specific job to be done. And actually, it's easier to show you here. So, for example, let's see the example of Figma. Their target customer is a design lead, the persona. They're trying to design a web app interface with their team, and they're currently using, for example, Sketch. But this process is slow and inefficient because Sketch does not allow multiple people to use Sketch and to work on the same file at the same time. So now they can work with teammates in the same file at the same time, one of the key value propositions of Figma, with real-time collaboration, so that the team can immediately build off each other's ideas instead of working in silos. And of course, if you use this framework, it's standardized the way that you describe the positioning, and you can use this not only to describe the artifacts that I just showed you in Claude, which makes it much easier for Claude or any of the different AI tools that you're using to leverage that context, but naturally when creating content as well. It makes it extremely clear that whenever you're targeting keywords or prompts for this specific persona, for this specific use case, this is the value proposition that needs to be used. Now for the most important part of the strategy, which is to find what are the actual prompts that your buyers are searching for. And this is interesting because a lot of the different AEO monitoring platforms, they give you suggested prompts and you'd think, okay, these are the prompts that my customers are searching for. But that's not true. Not even the category leading companies currently, because naturally Reach will become the category leading company in the space soon enough. They are trying to give you prompt volumes and they try to estimate how many people are searching for each of the different prompts. But, and here I'm going to have a spicy take, but naturally based on data, that is the wrong approach. Because even in Google, the amount of keywords that were new and the variations of searches that appeared when there are only keywords with 3-4 word patterns, they were a lot of them were new each day. So the keyword volume on Google was already an estimate that was a lot of times inaccurate. That's why the leading SEO experts already came up with the zero volume keyword strategies, basically addressing content and the strategy based on the search intent, not only on the search volume. With the prompts, it's that problem times 100 or more. There's going to be so many different long tail variations of searches. So what you need to understand is the search intent. So in other words, what are the questions that my customers are searching for? And you need to cluster them. And naturally, the first thing that you need to figure out is like, how do I find these searches? Because to be honest, you don't need the volume unless it's like in terms of market research or whatever. If you want to see if there are specific problems that your customer are searching for, sure. But you don't need that for SEO and AEO. What you need is basically to figure out what are the questions that my customers are actually searching for, and do they have high intent for the problems and the products and services that I'm solving or delivering for. In that way, of course, you can use the keyword volume to prioritize, but in many cases, what you care about is not even the volume. It's, is someone we're searching for this actively going to be on the purchase journey to buy my product? Because if so, even if only 20 people are searching for that per month, if everyone who's searching for that is actually on the buyer journey to buy your product, who cares if it's not 1,000 people? You're going to have 20 high intent customers searching for that. That's how we got 7+ figure deals finding Carro through ChatGPT, because we were targeting the right prompts that matter for them. Now let me walk you through some of the sources that have the highest signals for you to target. One, that is proprietary data. It's going in Google Search Console and figuring out what are the searches that are already driving traffic to your website. And then you can see if you're not already ranking in the top of the pages, and you can see if you're not actively being recommended for those searches in AI platforms. Then this is only for B2B companies, at least the sales transcripts. For B2C companies, you can also do customer support tickets. And you can actually mine what are the most common questions that your customers are asking for. Because if they're asking those questions to your sales reps, or they're asking questions, for example, with problems that your competitors have in their customer support tickets, the likelihood that they're going to search for that is extremely high. And then naturally, if you're already running paid ads and you've already got combinations of keywords that are performing extremely well, you should naturally try to rank for those and be recommended for those ones, both in Google and the different AI platforms. Then there's several others. I'm going to briefly walk you through them. Competitor keywords gap, so basically finding what are the keywords that are driving the highest amount of traffic and conversion to your competitors. People also ask, and I'm going to walk you through the process so that you see this. So both Perplexity Autocomplete and People Also Ask is from Google, Perplexity Autocomplete is from Perplexity. They tell you real questions that whoever is searching for a specific search is also searching for. And that gives you live data, both from Google, but also from how people are searching in AI. So this is actually a super interesting source. Naturally, the problem is that gives you an exponential amount of searches. And the only way for you to do this, at least to cover the whole breadth of searches that are here, it's programmatically. And I'm going to show you the approach that we use at Reach to make sure that everything that we do is data-driven. And then review platforms like G2, Trustpilot, Capterra, and also like the competitor sales pages, although this is a bit of an overlap here. This is just if a competitor is doing well, you can already see the analysis that they've done. But here, being transparent, this is only if you want to find the Pareto's law, because to be honest, we never use this because we do our own research, so typically we end up doing this better than the competitors. And let me actually walk you through the process. So let's, for example, see Google Search Console. We just pull all of the different searches and then we assign a relevant score. For each of the searches that we pull from Google Search, we just try to find what are the searches that matter the most. The relevance score is an algorithm that we created that combines a lot of different things. Not only is this the right keyword for your buyer journey and for your positioning, your ideal customer profile, but also are people actually searching for that? Can you actually rank for that? So on and so forth. And that allows us to analyze thousands of keywords that your competitors are ranking for. We also mine the real user questions, searches that people are making on Reddit, customer reviews, sales call transcripts, so on and so forth. And Perplexity, autocomplete, and people also ask mining. So for each of these individual keywords that we find that are relevant, we then identify a lot of different variations of searches and questions that people are also asking. And naturally, we then prioritize them according to the relevance that they have for your buyer journey. And typically, the mental model and the framework that we use, it's basically, first of all, you list the set of seed keywords. So basically, a set of keywords that are very important for you, typically from Google Search Console, competitive keyword gap analysis, your top category and product keywords, and an AI brainstorm. So basically, you could use ChatGPT and Perplexity, for example, to help you, or Claude, to help you brainstorm what your customers would search for. It's important to keep in mind that the recommendations that they will give most of the time are not accurate. So this is just to give you the seed keywords so that you can then expand on with actual live data. I wouldn't use the recommendations from ChatGPT, etc., because that's what the AEO platforms are giving, and most of the time it's like rubbish. Then we expand on them, as I mentioned, with people also ask, Perplexity, autocomplete, and also real user questions. But this is going to give you 100,000 searches, right? So the next thing that you need to do is basically prioritize them and basically cluster them. And this is going to get too complex, but something that is important to keep in mind is the SERP similarity, so the search engine results page similarity, and the query fanout similarity. So for example, let's walk you through a real example. Let's see here, and this is just a small sample of data, right? This has like 148 prompts, and we can see what are the query fanouts that different prompts are making under the hood, and this allows us to group prompts that are asking the same searches under the hood, so that you don't have to monitor the same prompt twice. Same thing with SERP similarity. If the search engine results are very similar, you can also cluster keywords, and naturally you can also use ChatGPT and Claude. To be honest, like for you to do this, it will require a lot of iterations, because naturally, as I showed you, and I can actually walk you through this, I'm just going to, and this is going to be a sneak peek, just so you see the amount of scripts that we had to create internally to do all of this analysis in a deterministic way is huge. So ChatGPT and Claude does not do any of this out of the box well, especially because they're probabilistic. In many cases, what ends up happening is that they hallucinate a lot, and that's why we create scripts, APIs, and deterministic tools that we use internally, so that we do all of these analysis without AI hallucinations. And yeah, this allows you to then have a subset of keywords and prompts that you're going to target prioritized. And actually, that's how you start the entire journey. Because the next step from this is to figure out what do you need to do to rank for each of the target keywords and prompts that you're trying to rank for. So, and this is a very important concept, because many people, they believe that you do the same thing for all of the different prompts. I've seen all sorts of rubbish online, like if you add statistics, it increases citation by X, Y, and Z. If you add FAQs, so that's trying to solve for the wrong problem, because what you need to do is for each of the different types of prompts. So for example, the best CRMs for a specific use case. You group the different variations of those prompts and you analyze what are the companies that are being recommended for this specific set of prompts, this specific taxonomy. And what you need to do to rank or to be recommended for this specific prompt is going to be completely different for what you need to do for this specific prompt. So there's not going to be one size fits all. And this is a very important misconception. At most, what you can do is to analyze prompt cohorts. So basically, you group prompts by a certain taxonomy and you see what are the patterns. And that also allows you to see gaps. So specific prompts where your competitors are not following the patterns that are actively getting companies recommended. And you know that you can start by those and you can prioritize those. So once again, I'm a huge fan of frameworks and mental models that we can use to solve specific jobs to be done. So we created at Reach the prompt reverse engineering framework, which is basically the set of steps, the process that we use to analyze how are companies being recommended and what do we need to do to get our customers to be the ones that are recommended for this specific prompt. It starts with the query fanouts. So first of all, you analyze what are the searches that the models are making. So for example, you choose a specific prompt. Let's go with here. You can group them, for example, by use case. And then you go into them and you see what are the searches that are being done. Then you need to see what are the companies that are ranking for this specific keyword. And actually, typically, if it's ChatGPT, they usually use Bing, although in many cases they also use Google. And more, they're starting to use generative search engine experiences like Exa.ai. So this space is moving very fast. And as you can see, our platform aggregates all of this data. So the search engine results page, the type, the search feature. So does it have an AI overview? Does it have ads? Does it have people also ask, so on and so forth? And we gather all of this data so that we can then do, and we do this with Claude, an analysis of the portfolio patterns. So for example, here we basically identify what are the patterns for each of the different prompt types. And we can see, for example, here for the best of top types of prompts, we can see the patterns. And then we can analyze specific sets of prompts. So for example, here we're analyzing based on the data that's collected within Reach with MCP and API. So we can do this analysis from Claude with the Reach platform, and we can analyze what are the patterns that are getting each of the different AI models to recommend companies when someone prompts best email finder for LinkedIn outreach. And as you can see, it does the analysis based on the data. So for example, listicles in this case, it's the most dominant format. So 71 out of the 119 pages are listicles, the ones that are being cited. We analyze the pattern, the winning title formats, the set of questions that are used in the FAQ section, so on and so forth. Like we analyze a lot of different patterns, and then naturally, all of these analyses allows us to create a super deterministic approach to create an action plan to rank for this prompt. Because then we know exactly what type of page we need to create in our website. If you already have a page that is actively trying to rank for those keywords, in order to avoid cannibalization, instead of creating a new page, you just revamp that specific page. And then if you figure out that owned content, so content on your website is not enough, you can also try to get third-party mentions. So basically, if you see that most of the content is not from your competitors, it's from third-party directories or review platforms or whatever, and you need to get those external third-party websites to mention and link your brand. And in many cases, you also need to engage in communities like Reddit. And this is analysis that you need to do. So for example, in here, you analyze what are the sources that are having the highest amount of impact. You analyze the types of content that are winning. For example, in this case, most of them are comparison pages or alternative pages. So listicles are not winning here. You know what I mean? And the source categories. There's another important point that you need to analyze, which is the sentiment and the positioning. That's a whole other conversation, but basically, after you get your company to be mentioned and cited, which in this case, Snov is already in every single day for each of the different models that we're currently tracking here, you need to make sure that you're mentioned with the right positioning. So, for example, you need to see, is it recommending my company with the right positioning for this specific use case? And is it recommending it, or is it saying that it's mentioning our company, but not with a positive sentiment, which is something that I see a lot of companies. So our mention rate is huge. Our share of voice in AI is very high. Yeah, but it's always saying bad things about your brand. So you're not going to get customers that way. So if you're doing that, naturally, that's not going to have an impact on your pipeline. And as I showed, this allows us, all of this process allows us to come up with a set of real user questions. So naturally, always linking to a source, all of the questions that people are searching for or commenting on Reddit, G2, Capterra, so on and so forth. And by giving a relevant score, we're able to come up with a prioritized set of target keywords and prompts. And then we import them into the Rich platform. We gather all of this data to do this analysis. And then we start executing both by creating content, engaging on naturally when creating content with the common patterns that we found. Super important, it's to prioritize the link and mention building campaigns with the highest amount of citations for the prompts that you want to rank for. And the same thing with community engagement, engaging with the communities that are having the highest impact in terms of citations. This is going to be a matrix that I'm going to share after the fact, but basically the idea is it's a matrix that I created to try to simplify what you should decide in terms of what you should do. Basically, the idea is very simple. If the citations are from vendor pages, so your competitors, and you see that you can outrank them, that they don't have a huge amount of very well-performing content for the specific patterns that you find, you can build your own page. But if most of the citations are third-party, you need to do mention building. So basically, getting into the listicles that are getting other companies to be recommended. If most of the citations are community, you know that you need to go on Reddit, so on and so forth. So I already did most of the demo, but basically this allows you to create this set of target keywords. Once again, you add them to either the Reach platform or, of course, there's other AEO monitoring platforms. The only problem, and that's why we decided to create our own platform, is that they don't collect all of the data and they don't do all of the analysis for you to be able to decide what you need to do to rank and be recommended for a prompt, and then to analyze, is it recommending us with the right sentiment and the right positioning, which is also super important. So all of these analysis to be well done, it's missing that. So how do you actually create a roadmap after you have all of this data? First of all, you need to start with technical SEO, because whether it's for search engines or generative search engines or LLMs, you always need to make sure that when you're creating content, the agents and the search engines can actually index that content and can crawl it, because otherwise they cannot read it, right? So this sets the foundation. Typically a lot of SEO agencies, etc., because we review a lot of different SEO audits and suggestions by SEO agencies and marketing agencies, they focus a lot on technical SEO and they spend a lot of time creating a roadmap for all of the fixes. But it's very important to keep in mind that for you not to get lost in a sea of technical SEO recommendations, the highest impact technical SEO fixes are for the ones that are impacting pages that are very well positioned to rank for or be recommended for the prompts that will have the highest impact on your buyer journey. So instead of fixing everything at once, you should fix the ones that, first of all, are impacting your entire domain, and second of all, are impacting the pages that will drive the most revenue to you. Then you create a roadmap, or technically you create a content roadmap first to also prioritize the technical SEO, and then you start creating pages. It's so very important to decide very well whether you should create a new page or revamp an existing one. Because if you already have a page that is trying to rank for a specific keyword or a specific prompt, you should not create another one trying to compete with that one, because that will split up the authority of those pages within those two pages. So instead of having one page with all of the authority, it's going to be split between the two and they will cannibalize each other. So it's very important to do this analysis at scale, which is also a problem that we typically do programmatically. For each page, we see what are the keywords and prompts that we're trying to rank for, what are the query fanouts that the models are searching under the hood, and then we see, do you already have any page trying to rank for that? If you do, you either delete that page or you revamp that page. And it's very important that you keep the content fresh. If you have a page that is performing perfectly, but it's 1 year old, very likely it's not going to be cited because models tend to cite pages that are fresh. And it makes sense, right? Because the models typically have got a training data set that is like outdated. So they're craving for fresh information. That's why they have a huge bias towards revamped and up-to-date content. And this is the most important thing. There's a common misconception that says 85% of the pages are third-party content, and this is true in most cases. So for example, in here, as you can see, most of the sources that AI search uses, it's from other players, other platforms, other websites. Snov is only present in 22% of the citations. However, that doesn't mean that you should only optimize for third-party mentions, PR, etc. community. That's once again bullshit, because you can actually get a company to be one of the most cited sources in AI. We've done that with several of our customers. With own content, with content on your website. And that's super important because it's content where you control the narrative. And of course, if there's specific prompts that are very hard to influence, that's when you start working with third-party mentions, so link and mention building and community engagement, to basically reinforce the prompts that you cannot influence just with your website content. And here, basically, we are giving a tip because a lot of technical SEO impact typically doesn't have a lot of impact. So we're giving here some tips around what is the 5% of technical SEO that has proven, based on the research that we've done, to have 95% of the impact. First of all, you need to make sure this is the table stakes, that you allow search and AI crawlers to actually crawl their websites. Second of all, so this is basically making sure robots.txt, the sitemap, etc. is all up to date and well formatted. Second of all, the pages need to be crawlable and well rendered. So for example, if a page is loading heavy with JavaScript, in many cases, the crawlers cannot actually render it. And if they take too much time to load, the crawlers also will skip it. So it's basically as if, even if you have the page ranking for that specific keyword, the crawlers then cannot read the content, you will not influence the answer. So these two are table stakes. There's a couple of other things adjacent to these that we often see that are a lot of the reasons behind the pages are not ranking. So for example, having the canonical page, the canonical tag referencing that specific page. So for example, let's see a specific page here. Here, of course, this page is not trying to rank for anything, but if the canonical is not pointing to the same page, it is basically saying to the search engines that this is not the main version of this page. So things like these have a lot of impact and need to be fixed. The other one that actually has a huge impact of impacting not only discoverability and crawlability, but even rankings and citations, it's to add a lot of internal links. So basically, other pages on your website pointing to that specific page, linking to that specific page, and research that we've read actually shows that consistently within hundreds of thousands of pages, pages that have 8+ contextual, so internal links within the context of this page, pointing to that specific page, and the pulling 300% more traffic. And there's a couple of other things, but these ones are the most important ones. And these are the 5 principles that we typically use to prioritize the content roadmap. So first of all, you need to start where you already have authority. So basically, if you're trying to compete in a space where you don't have a lot of authority, so for example, if you group by here, by a specific use case, and you see in here, these ones, for example, you barely have any visibility and citation, and you barely have any impact in terms of keywords, it's very likely because you don't have topical authority. And it's going to be extremely hard for you to rank and impact citations here. So you need to start building that topical authority by creating thought leadership content, getting third-party mentions, and creating content that is actually ranking for that specific topic or use case. But if you want to have short-term results, you should start by the ones that you're already winning. And naturally, especially because in most cases, you need to create a business case for the board, for the executives, you should start with the ones that will drive the revenue sooner. So that way you can get the buy-in of everyone in the organization because you've tackled the ones that will show sooner that this has an impact on pipeline. Then it's the things that I've already explained. You need to make sure that the content that you create matches the content type that is influencing that type of prompt. And you should not prioritize things by volume. You should prioritize by, first of all, these ones, the topics that I mentioned above, but also the gaps that you have in terms of citations. Because if you don't have citations for a specific set of prompts, you will not be able to influence them. And the very important thing is to not create a lot of content of the same type on its own. So, for example, just because you see that listicles are impacting a specific set of prompts, you shouldn't just create listicles. You should mix it with other types of content. Otherwise, it can be perceived as a spam signal. And naturally, trying to win for a search, you should make sure to make the content agent ready. Not only creating the formats and topics and pieces of content that are currently having an impact on those types of prompts, as I explained, but also making sure that the content is fresh, it is original, and it has information gain. LLMs are craving for new information, so they're prioritizing a lot content that has unique insights, new data, naturally relevant to that specific prompt, and it is authoritative. You need to make sure that you try to create content with as much citations, sources, and positioning you as an authority in the space. There's a couple of others. These are the most important ones for the sake of content. This framework, it's something that the Rich team prepared to basically help you if you're not going to do this analysis, because I know that a lot of you are probably thinking, yeah, but we are not going to create 200 scripts to do this analysis and collect all of this data, so we don't have the ability to do this analysis. That's fair, that's true. So what we try to do is to create sort of the low-hanging fruits and the typical patterns that we see of the content that performs the best for each of the different types of prompts. We're going to share all of these after the fact so that you can use this as sort of a cheat sheet without having to do that analysis. However, know that if you do this, you're going to leave a lot of money on the table because naturally it's not going to work one size fits all. Same thing for the bottom of funnel search patterns. I'm also going to share these after the webinar so that you can see what are the search patterns that typically convert the best. In terms of earned mentions, here, to be honest, the most important thing that you need to do is actually choose the right prompts and analyze what are the pages that are having the highest impact on the set of prompts that you're trying to target. So, for example, you should actually prioritize this, and this is another thing that no other platform allows to do, by the types of prompts that are the most the most in the bottom of the funnel, the better, because they're going to be the highest intent. So this way, if you prioritize by the ones that are having an impact, both on bottom of the funnel prompts and also in specific types of pages. So for example, you can see all of the listicles, and then you know all of the listicles that are impacting bottom of the funnel prompts, and you can reach out to them because typically rich listicles are very likely to also mention you, right? Because they're already mentioning 10 companies, and these ones you can even do swaps. You can basically reach out to them, and if you have pages that are currently having a lot of mentions and citations, you can even do this with some of your competitors, especially the ones that are not direct competitors for the use cases that you want. Or, for example, let's say that the competitor is better for a specific use case. You can give them a mention in that specific use case that you don't care about, and they give you a mention in a use case that you are more focused on than them. You know what I mean? And naturally, once again, this is easier if you can prioritize and slice and dice all of this information. And the same thing for community engagement. That's why, once again, we built this platform that allows us to slice and dice all of this information and then export this into uh, outreach tools. So you can let me show you this. For example, we can actually generate a message draft with AI based on the templates that our team created, and then it generates the messages with AI, and you can accept, and then you can export, you can populate this across the board, and you can export these into, for example, instantly ample market, and then do this outreach at scale. Naturally, you can create a specific set of message for each groups of mentions. So for example, you can filter all of the listicles, and you can create a specific message for all of the pages that are listicles, and you can do a mention swap, for example, and then you can create a different outreach campaign for different types of pages. Same thing with the communities. The approach, to be honest, it's very similar to mention and link building, with a huge caveat, which is in these communities, you typically need to create accounts, you need to build authority. For example, in Reddit, it's karma. You need to provide helpful answers for each of those different, um, each of the different subreddits that are having the highest engagement. That builds karma, and then you can once again generate, which we also do with our own templates. It generates replies based on the set of strategy that performs the best for that type of subreddits. Once again, you can slice and dice the different types of communities and types of posts to generate specific sets of messages for each of them. And then naturally, it's super important that you measure the things that are actually working. And that's why we built the page insights, which is basically a feature in Reach that allows us to pull data from Google Search Console, collecting our own AI search data, collecting Google Analytics data about engagement and conversion data, and also identifying the technical SEO issues that are impacting these pages, so that you can identify what are the pages that are performing the best, and then you can do A/B tests. So for example, you can create 10 pages with one approach and 10 pages with the other, see which one of them is performing the best, and you can compare the two. And then if one set of pages is performing better than the other, you can retroactively update the other pages that are not performing as well with the approach that is performing the best, basically doing A/B tests. And this is super important, so that you have an impact not only on keyword data, on keywords rankings and prompt citations, but actually in conversions, in the set of pages that are having the highest amount of, for example, leads generated. And this is super important because this is what matters at the end of the day. And naturally, our recommendation is to try to iterate as often as you can and monitor them closely, because the patterns might change. And if they change, you need to treat it as a product. You need to update it. You shouldn't set it and forget it. Now, to the part that Inês was going to do. I'm going to briefly cover this because, to be honest, it's very important. After you get a lot of high intent visitors on your website, whether they came through Google or AI search, they end up going to your website. You can actually de-anonymize that traffic. So basically, you can identify up to 45% of the companies that are actually going to your website, and you can actually de-anonymize that traffic, identify who are those companies and who are those people, and actually you can use that for both sales purposes and marketing purposes. And I'm also going to walk you through some of the different types of campaigns that you can do to make sure that even if your website doesn't convert that on its own, you can actually continue chasing them. And it's very important to keep in mind that if you chase these companies with outbound campaigns, with ads, they're going to be 14x more likely to convert because they already know you. They are currently actively in market for a solution that you sell. And obviously, they were pre-warmed up and pre-sold by AI. So they're going to be much more likely to reply to an email outreach that you do. If your sales reps reach out to them, they're going to be much more likely to convert. And same thing with paid ads. So how it works, to be honest, here, the point is just that you use some sort of software that allows you to do this the anonymization, and you export this data, prioritize it, because naturally not all of the traffic is going to be qualified, so you need to filter according to ICP criteria. And then if it's super hot, so for example, if it's traffic that is going to your pricing pages, case study pages, you should pass it to sales. And while it's hot, they should reach out to them and start a conversation. If it's going to be ideal customer profile traffic to other pages that are also high intent, not generic top of funnel pages, you start nurturing them with retargeting campaigns, both outbound, like email marketing campaigns, and paid ads. And a couple of the different campaigns that you can run. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to naturally follow up with everyone with all of the frameworks that we've shown, the slides as well. And we're going to invite everyone for the next webinar where we're going to show live how to run all of these with Cloud Code. And Inez is going to show how to do this process as well, how to actually set up the retargeting campaigns with Cloud Code. There's three main retargeting campaigns. First of all, it's basically serving paid ads to those specific lists of companies and or people. Second, to run signal ad outbound. So for example, if a set of companies are going to your pricing page or specific case study pages, and you can create some filters, like for a specific topic or a specific set of case studies, you can then use that information to create personalized cold outreach messaging to go after those companies, and it's going to feel super personalized because you know exactly where they were, what they are reading about. And naturally, you can use this data to populate the CRM also automatically so that your sales reps, your account executives use that information, and they know when they're speaking with companies what are the things that are the hottest to them, the pain points that they're researching the most, and they can use this information to personalize both the messages that they send, but also how they run the sales process. And then in the next session, we're going to walk you through how to do LinkedIn ads with retargeting and how to set it up in a way that is optimized for conversion. Same thing with Meta, which is a bit harder to do because you cannot use company data. You need to use personal emails, which doesn't work as well, but we're going to walk you through what you can do and how to create signal-led outbound campaigns personalized based on the data that you have. And thank you very much for everyone that showed up and stayed with us here until the end. And as promised, you can follow both me and Inês on LinkedIn because we share, especially me and our team, we share a lot of insights that we get from the research that we're running for AI search, the tactics that we're using that are performing the best and getting the best results for our customers. And I'm going to follow up with the case studies, with the full teardowns of the results that our team achieved, and also with the slides that we used for this webinar. And we're also going to offer one additional bonus, which is the Google and AI Search Visibility Looker or Data Studio dashboard that our founding AI Search strategist Bernardo created, which got more than 3,800 comments requesting it, and we're also going to offer it for free. So stay tuned, and thank you very much for bearing with us and caring about this topic. Wish you a great afternoon. Cheers.